just started supporting three grants where science could not be done on Earth, could be done on the space station. It's the astronauts who do that work, but there's a preliminary phase on Earth, and we at the NIH support that. The NASA supports the conversion to the space station, something that's very, very, very exciting. Not being done on human beings, done mainly on systems so far, but will be done in animal systems in the not too distant future. So what about some of the more rare bone disease research? Again, rare diseases we know in the United States can only be advanced, rare disease knowledge can only be advanced with a commitment of many collaborators. Anytime you deal with pediatric disease, pediatricians are somehow different. They're much nicer than the rest of us. I'll just speak for myself. They're much nicer than the rest of me. They really work together. They know how to, maybe because they deal with children who work in a sandbox and work together, but they really do work together. And I know, I can tell you that the pediatric rheumatologists in the United States work very well, and the North American orthopedic surgeons work very well, those who are in pediatric medicine. So a lot of new data has come, and we look to these as examples. These are just prototypes of what is to come. Fibrodysplasia ossificans progressiva. Many countries participated in these particular types of studies, and new ideas for where this area is going, a devastating disease. Also with regard to bone marrow resorption formation in Camurati-Engelmann disease, and in the autoinflammatory diseases, which were actually identified and classified in our intramural program at the NIH, are now very clearly being pursued in many, many areas around the world. And new drugs are being developed as a consequence of understanding new pathways. Actually, even old drugs are being used. Now we know how they're being used. We know what they're good for because of these new insights into these diseases. And we do have this rare bone disease patient network that was started by the U.S. Bone and Joint Decade. Again, I'm underscoring collaboration because some of these organizations are nascent, just really starting. Some are already well on their way. And we strongly encourage, and very often it is us or it's our professional organizations that will sort of nurture these groups to get them to understand how the whole process works in terms of the appropriation, in terms of lobbying. We don't. The NIH doesn't do any. Let me make that clear. NIH doesn't do any lobbying. But you can imagine somebody wanting to know, how do we get more money to support musculoskeletal medicine? And I might not write it on the blackboard, but I might say what some of my thoughts are, because I always answer questions to people in the best possible way I can. So the patient groups in the United States are tremendously important in terms of letting our Congress and our policymakers know what their priorities are. And they're probably more important, at least as important, if not more important, than the scientists. Because the scientists, the Congress often looks at the scientists and saying, oh, well, they're just trying to fill their pockets, they feel there's an entitlement. But when patients come, it's a completely different story. And many congressmen have told me that same story. So many of these foundations have flourished during this Bone and Joint Decade. Then we also have a commitment to training. I know that the American Bone and Joint Decade has had this and has done it very, very, very successfully. I have participated in one or two of those sessions, but the Bone and Joint Decade has this Young Investigators Grant Mentoring Program. I know that Nancy Olson was involved with, but I know many others have been involved with it from the either the rheumatic diseases side or the orthopedic side, and it's been tremendously helpful because it is a national mentoring program for people who are applying for grants to the NIH and other agencies. And I assure you, when they've been through the hands of Regis O'Keefe or Josh Jacobs or many other, Nancy Olson, they are much more likely to get funded because all of the trivial stuff is out of there. We also have a tremendous commitment to training clinical researchers in this area. One particular area during these past 10 years has been in nurturing people to study the muscular dystrophies. Somehow the muscular dystrophies fall through the cracks. Is it the neurologist? Is it the pediatrician? And what we've tried to do is we've really tried to garner a whole a group of young people in terms of the excitement of what's going on in the various types of muscular dystrophies. And of course, academic institutions and professional societies are also doing a yeoman's work in this particular area. So beyond our borders, the NIH's International Clinical Research Fellows Program, which I recently presented to my council, is one that we're participating in because the question is, what about all those people who are underserved or who are basically not served at all? What about all the people in many developing countries? I think of one continent, and that is sub-Saharan Africa and all those countries. Think of some of the countries in Asia and in South America. Well, we now have a program where we want to train people to go to places where there are critical masses of investigators. And there are many. There are many supported by the US. There are many supported by the UK. There are many supported by the German governments. And we want those people, these young people, to go to work there for a year or 2 years, come back with a project that will be mutually beneficial, not just do a project for a year and then leave, but do a continuing project that will eventually be supported by the NIH. And we've just announced this. Our announcement is in the area of musculoskeletal and skin diseases, and we look forward for people to do this. This is not to say that we don't take people from other countries and train them in the United States, but it's a different type of training. What we're trying to do is better understand some of the circumstances and some of the challenges in these countries rather than in our own country. I can tell you from personal experience, having a son who actually has been living in Nairobi for the last 4.5 years, and he's particularly interested in the identification of various types of flu epidemics. But he has a very good sense of what some of the issues are, what some of the challenges are when you go out and you want to vaccinate a group of individuals. Depending on where you are in sub-Saharan Africa, you're going to get a big response or less of a response. It happens in Kenya, where there's a lot of literacy. There's a tremendous response to vaccination, as opposed to some of the places like Nigeria, Burkina Faso, where there's not as much embrace of that. So it's important for us to know, in terms of musculoskeletal medicine, trauma, for example. Whereas trauma must be a big factor. A clubbed foot must be a big factor that's not being addressed in some of these countries. Scoliosis, another one. I didn't say scoliosis just because I saw Stuart Weinstein here, by the way. But these must be important issues in this in our world. So to improve the diagnosis and treatment of musculoskeletal disease, a lot of things have been done. I'm just going to identify one, and that is in 2004, our Surgeon General asked us to do a survey, the 2004 U.S. Surgeon General's report on bone health and osteoporosis. This was a massive endeavor led by the late Larry Royce, as well as Joan McGowan from the NIAMS. And the topics that were covered are here. They have really informed a national coalition for osteoporosis and related bone diseases, where there's a national action plan for bone health. These are the types of things that you have to keep in front of the population, otherwise they forget about them. They forget, if they're not particularly concerned with what their DEXA showed last week or what their ultrasound showed, they're not going to pay much attention to it. But this is one way that we think, through education, that we can keep this on the radar screen. And certainly we have examples. Now, the examples are not absolutely cause and effect, but if you show examples of what has happened with hip fractures among women aged 25 years in the United States, we know that in the early 1990s there was a big bolus of money given to the NIH for musculoskeletal medicine. This was before I took over as the director. We know that in 1994 there was an NIH Osteoporosis and Related Bone Diseases National Research Center, which was an educational program, and there was a consensus conference on optimal calcium intake. And that's when the so-called SOFT study, the study of osteoporotic fractures in women, started in 1995. Great foresight, because we're still learning. It's one of these investments that keeps on giving, because we follow these women for long periods of time. In the late 1990s, bisphosphonates came out. There was a 2000 consensus conference on osteoporosis prevention, diagnosis, and therapy, where we talked about some of the limitations of the diagnostics aids that we have. And then we have the Bone and Joint Decade, which has certainly increased the knowledge base of our population. And we now do see that there's a 25% decrease. I think there's a pretty uniform agreement of this downward trend, which is an absolutely wonderful thing. There are not so many things that you can show like this in terms of a downward trend, although we can't say any one of those interventions did something. But we do know with an aging population that was not the expected curve. We sort of bended that curve, which I think is a very good thing. So in enhancing patient care, we do have the National Center for Quality Insurance. They added osteoporosis management in women who have a fracture. Big time question as the population ages. Who gets a DEXA? Who gets treatment? Who really has osteoporosis? Which is still a question. The American Orthopedic Association launched the Own the Bone to prevent secondary fragility fractures. And in 2008, the Joint Commission, which is really a commission that's interested in quality and safety, published 10 voluntary measures to improve osteoporosis management. I should say in 2002, I slipped on a piece of ice and broke my ankle. And that didn't hold me down. I had to go to Europe the next day. But when I came back from Europe, I had a council meeting at the NIH, and nobody said hello to me when I walked in the room. Everybody said, "Did you get a DEXA? Did you get a DEXA?" Because they were concerned that orthopedic surgeons in the United States don't tend to get DEXAs. I think that has changed. It has not changed as much as we want, but it certainly has changed. So educating healthcare providers is also an important element. All the healthcare providers, the physicians assistants, et cetera. So the activities of the new healthcare providers are shown here. The National Osteoporosis Foundation 2008 Symposium on Osteoporosis also pointed to this. It was not necessarily for people like yourselves who know about this, but it is for people who don't know about this. Another opportunity that's coming up in the United States is this investment in comparative effectiveness research. In other words, is it just that you have to show something that's better than placebo, or now is it something that you've got to show that is better than the other drug? And we haven't been doing most of those studies because companies don't like to do them. Lilly and Merck don't like to put their drugs up against each other. Lilly and Merck won't even combine their drugs in a study. We've done studies that where we'll use an anabolic agent as well as a bisphosphonate to try to see if you put the two together, they happen to come from two different companies, which one is better. And those studies, beautiful studies, were done by Dennis Black from UCSF. So comparative effectiveness is a report that came from the Institute of Medicine where they identified 100 of the most important areas for